And yet our political governmental patterns are like the Roman Empire. You know, Rome's emblem was an eagle. They had a Capitol Hill. They had a Senate. It goes on and on. Our architecture is Greek-Roman in Washington. Now, what you're saying now is if we go to the patterns of Egypt, which we taught last year again on our prophetic alert, that we can see, and you know, one of the interesting things is plagues began to attack Egypt, and you had God's people living there who were the covenant people, and you had the Egyptians, which is representative, and I've heard preachers say this for years, of the world system. And there was a clash that came between God's people and the world system, but the world system was trying to take God's people's wealth from them and prosperity that they had gained. After 400 years, here we go again. When was America's first colony? 1607, 2007, 2008. It's the 400-year cycle. That's why you and I taught that the pattern of Egypt will be in the United States because of that cycle. And we were teaching this years before there were any changes happening in America. Now pick up from there and tell us what else you've seen.
Well, anyway, it's just to say, just to tag something on the end of that, because some people might think, well, you know, that sounds kind of ridiculous. But you need to understand, if the Bible teaches us that we are to go back to the beginning in order to understand the end. A lot of times, like Perry said, it may not say America, but if you see the patterns in there, that's why we say these things. And so then going back to the verse, there's a pattern in Egypt that says it's going to make his rivers run like oil. We'll see how this thing plays out, but they're calling it the greatest, you know, environmental disaster in history, or at least in our history. All right, but going on from that, then, you know, as I said, there are other things that happen. And, you know, we have a prophecy against Egypt. Then we come on over into Ezekiel 35. We have prophecies against Mount Seir, which is Edom. We come into Ezekiel 36. And actually, this is a prophecy that relates to the mountains of Israel. And in fact, it describes them as being desolate. It describes them as being swallowed up on every side by the enemy who claims them for themselves. And then the whole point of this is God is sifting the nations. You know, he is sifting the nations, Egypt, all these other different nations, to get his people in the place that he's ready for them to be, because he's about to bring the restoration of all things. And so then, and I think maybe this is where you're going, but I'll just go ahead and make this point. All these things kind of have to happen before the war of Gog and Magog. So I don't think, Perry, and I think you agree with this, the war of Gog of Magog is probably not going to happen next month.
That's right.
You know, or it's not going to happen probably in the next couple of months.
Well, haven't you and I both taught that there is wars before the Gog and Magog war? Because see, what's happening right now, because Persia is saber rattling, and there is daily discussions about Israel going to war with Persia to hit the nuclear facilities. And I'm going to tell you something else that's in Iran. There are some biological, chemical places underground that are very dangerous that they have to be hit as well. And that's all I'm going to say on that. But the reason that we say this is in Ezekiel, you talk about the war of Gog and Magog, which is the big one that involves Persia. A lot of people are saying, is this where it's going? The nations have not aligned with Iran at this point the way they're mentioned in the Gog and Magog war, because you have to have Ethiopia, Libya, Togarmah, Gomer, and at least at this point. Now, if a year from now things have changed, maybe we can say, hey, they've changed. But over here, let me read this to you. This is Ezekiel chapter 38. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith God, I am against thee, O Gog. Now, it's interesting that you have the word Gog here, but in the book of Revelation, you see Gog reappear when Satan, after the 1,000-year reign, has been loosed from the pit. He comes forth with Gog and Magog to do battle against Jerusalem, where the camp of the saints are. And so Gog and Magog is not just the name of a place, it's the spirit.
I think it's a spirit.
It's a spirit. It's a chief prince. It's like a principality, Ephesians 6 and 12. It's like a prince of Grecia, a prince of Persia there in Daniel 10. It is an angelic being that rules over the north country in an evil manner. And here's what God says, I will turn thee back and put hooks in your jaws. Now, Bill, would you kind of agree with me that just the phrase turn you back indicates that they have moved forward into something, possibly a war, and God stopped them and turned them back, did not allow them to defeat Israel. But then later he puts a hook in their jaw, pulls them into the mountains of Israel for this great battle. In other words, I believe that there could be a war with Persia that precedes the war of Gog and Magog. And maybe the war with Persia and the defeat of Persia is what initiates this Islamic coalition. And all these nations, by the way, in Ezekiel 38 are now Islamic. If you look at the north quarters, if you look at Libya, Ethiopia, Persia, the north quarters, of course, would be north of Israel. That would be the area of Turkey, which is Islamic, and you've got those southern Russian states, which are Islamic. So this is an Islamic coalition in Ezekiel 38 and 39 in the war of Gog and Magog. So I believe it's possible that this war that will come at some point involving Persia is going to, Persia will regroup using Gog and Magog, which is the north country.
I think that's possible. And what do you think about the fact that it might involve these other countries, these other nations that are mentioned, like in Ezekiel 36, for instance, the remnant of the nations and all of Edom, perhaps even involving what Isaiah has to talk about in relation to Damascus. There seems to be a war before the big war, and that's the point. That's the point.
Now, one of the reasons that many people believe there's a war before the main war is because there is a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17 and verse 1. In fact, Isaiah is very interesting. If you have an opportunity after the program, and wait till the program is completely off before you do this, go to the book of Isaiah and begin to read the prophecy against all of the different nations that are mentioned there. And I don't know if you've got a commentary Bible there, Bob, that lists the different nations. This particular Bible doesn't have the commentary on top of it, but you have a prophecy against Egypt, against Babylon, against Arabia, and against Damascus. So what, you're smiling over there.
Because you called me Bob.
I call you Bob, Bill. That's, you know, I'm over 50. I have an excuse now. I have an excuse. Bill, okay. Maybe we're supposed to rename you Bob on the program. I don't know.
Right.
But over there in chapter 17, let me just read it for the folks who are interested in knowing. The burden of Damascus. Now, Damascus is the capital of Syria. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city. It shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Arior are forsaken. They shall be for flocks and shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria shall be as the glory of the children of Israel. In other words, and I've studied this in detail at the International Prophecy Conference, all the scholars that are there and teachers agree that that's never happened. Damascus has never been, it's the oldest continuing city. It's been raided a few times, but because of the oasis that's there, the water that's there in that trade route, ancient trade route, it's never been totally destroyed. Now, I have been told that there could be up to 10,000 terrorists who live in and around Damascus. Number two, and if you don't have my book, Nightmare Along Pennsylvania Avenue, I have a whole section on weapons of mass destruction. And there is good evidence that the reason there was nothing in Iraq is it was all moved before the war into Syria. And we even give the actual locations in the book of the underground military bases in the cave, and we talk about the sources that know about that. And so if that material would ever be used in a war with Israel, I can assure you that Damascus would be destroyed. Now, if Damascus is destroyed in the future, prophetically, then you go and realize that the Persians have been defeated and only 1/6 of all the armies remain of these nations. Then what country does that leave? It leaves Iraq. It leaves Iraq as the superpower of that part of the world. And what is Iraq biblically? It's ancient Babylon, which is absolutely in Isaiah 14, Revelation 17, 18, mentioned in the prophetic word.
Can I say this?
You sure can. You can say anything you want, Bill.
Just to kind of summarize here, Bob's going to speak. So what we've got, I think, Perry, is situations that are occurring in the United States and in the West that I believe will, in the future, neutralize the United States as far as being the primary economic and military power. I'm not saying that's the destruction of the United States. I'm just saying it's the neutralization of the United States. So that opens, if you will, somewhat of a power vacuum. And then we've got Israel's going to be basically isolated, and especially if things continue the way they are politically these days, Israel's going to be isolated. And then you've got Hezbollah. Just a lot of people don't understand, Perry, that when you go to the Golan Heights, Damascus is only 30 minutes away.